So these comments from Sir Keir Starmer that have kind of set hairs running today, we're at this conference of sort of centre-left leaders in Montreal a few days ago. And Patrick Maguire, our senior political correspondent earlier, kind of picked up on that, actually. And these comments perhaps from a slightly unguarded Sir Keir Starmer at this conference versus how he might be addressing the issue of Brexit and future relationship with the EU at home. What's your take? What's your read on that particular element of this?
Well, I think that is fascinating. And I suspect that Keir Starmer is learning, however high profile he's been, now that we are probably a year away from an election and the polls are where they are, he is going to learn that you cannot have any unguarded moments at all, because someone will pick up on it. And what's really interesting is I think these comments were made about 5 or 6 days ago, and they sort of lurked around until, one of the lobby obviously listened and picked it all up. So, and I think the fact that the Labour spokesman sort of rushed out a comment is fascinating. And I guess, the issue is that really what he thinks? How is he in tune with his rest of his party, with those voters they want to win back? But he has, of course, got to a bit of a truth, which even I think the most ardent of Brexiteers would admit, which is that the so-called Brexit dividend, where we diverge and create a whole new system, we have yet to see in this country, and yet to hear about very much. So I think this is probably a debate that's got more to run.
And Jack, on a sort of related note, a lot of this, clearly, a lot of everything in politics is about communication. And Sir Keir Starmer making these comments in Canada and then sort of almost having to clean up the mess, if I can, in inverted commas, of them here at home a few days later. It's slightly odd, isn't it? You would kind of hope that he might be a bit more upfront and clear while at home and avoid having to clean up any mess at all.
Yeah, I think I've tried to read the comments carefully, and I'm not sure he is exactly saying what he's portrayed as having said, but I do recall similar instances where, maybe something said in one context can sound very different in another. I was once speaking to a group of school, I was going to say school children, I'll get a row from Chloe's kids. A group of school pupils in the Highlands. And I was asked a question about why I was not banning alcohol at the same time as banning smoking in public places in Scotland, which we'd done back in 2005, 2006. And I replied something like, well, look, I think it's okay to have a drink now and again, but I think smoking in public places has a wider health impact and therefore we need to ban that. And of course, the next day's Daily Mail had a front page headline, McConnell tells 15-year-olds it's okay to have a drink sometime. Yeah. So sometimes when you say something in one context, it can be portrayed very differently the next day. And I think maybe at these big international conferences, when you're away from home, it's easier to do that than when you're at home. I think what's more important here is I think Labour needs to move away from just reading.
Oh no, Jack, your line's falling over somewhat, so we'll try and get that fixed, and we'll come back to you in a sec. Yeah. Also notable that wasn't the last time, obviously, that Jack McConnell's been caught out by a question from a Highlander. I'll just make that point. Nikki, it is...
Well, he's not there to defend himself.
He's brave then, isn't he, Nikki?
This is the only time I'd make that
replay that bit.
Yeah, exactly. The only time I'd say that is when Lord McConnell's not on the line. Nikki, I mean, there is a sort of wider political point in lots of what has happened actually in the last few days as well, which is a divergence point, and I'm talking about divergence between Labour and the Conservatives. We're very much gearing up for an election at this point, aren't we? Are you starting to see a bit of clarity actually between these two parties who, particularly over the summer, there was a lot of criticism that actually spot the difference was proving to be really quite difficult?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's a deliberate strategy, certainly of the Conservatives and of the Prime Minister. And I think we're, as I understand it, there's a series of things and the education potential reforms, sort of the latest. We've obviously had the net zero announcements this week, whereby obviously the Prime Minister is very keen to portray that come the election, actually you're not going to be voting for, if you vote Conservative, it will be change, and there will be things being done differently, and problems that have been lurking around for a while being brought out and tackled, and everything else. And so, yeah, deliberate creation of the so-called blue water between the parties. Of course, the big thing that's going to determine the election is going to be the economy, as always. And on that, I suspect there isn't a huge amount of difference, and deliberately on the Labour Party's part. Rachel Reeves is very much following the government spending plans, what the Chancellor's doing, and Jeremy Hunt yesterday saying he couldn't see there being lots of scope for big tax cuts, which is what obviously many people in the Conservative Party want, and think that will be another big difference with the Labour Party. So there will be some differences, but there'll be some key areas where I think, again, the electorate's going to be hard pressed to spot that difference.